Alright, here's my sort of like behind the scenes how to put one of these cabinets together. It's not going to be very detailed. I mean, there's no videos of me doing any cuts or anything like that, but hopefully it's some sort of inspiration to maybe build one yourself. But anyways, this first picture here shows me having the two pieces of wood clamped together after making the profile cut. By having the two pieces of wood clamped together, it makes it so I only have to do the profile cut once, and that way both sides are identical, so I don't have to worry about making any measurements match on either side. Since they're both cut at the same time, they match perfectly. Here's another picture of just the mess I made. Same thing, shows how they're clamped together. Use a combination of the circular saw and jigsaw and a drill with a little sanding wheel on the end of it to kind of help round the corners. There's another view of it, get you another idea. And then there's a picture of the drill with the sanding wheel on the end of it. If you notice the corner there, how it's rounded, I actually drew that out beforehand so that way I can use it as a guide to know how to keep the round edge staying within the line so it turns out equal on all the edges. There's another example of how I rounded the edges out on the control panel edge. And here's a photo of basically all the pieces that I needed to make the cabinet. All the cuts are done. I already glued on and stapled the little blocks to begin assembly. I was just waiting for the blocks to dry on there. Usually only takes a couple of hours for the wood glue to dry, pretty much, so you can start putting things together. There's a close-up on it. If you look closely at each one of the blocks, you'll see a couple of staples on each one of them. It's not held together with just staples. I put a bead of glue on each one of those, some wood glue. And then the staples are basically to hold it extra steady while the glue dries. So both work together to help reinforce those. There's another diagram or another photo of it. Going back to it, if you look closely around each one of the blocks, you'll notice some lines here. Those are actually me using a piece of this wood to get an idea of how each one is going to stand up from it. So basically the piece of wood is going to lay right here once it's done, and then there's going to be this edge here kind of sticking up from it. So it gives you kind of a sense to plan ahead on how exactly you want things to set in there. So it really helps out to think about things before you start nailing and cutting and things like that. There's just another picture of more of the pieces and the rest of the pieces right here. Alright, here's basically by the end of the day, you can have one of these basically put together to this point in one day. It's definitely not unheard of. Yeah, this was basically the end of the day, getting all the pieces glued and stapled together. And then once I get to this point, I usually let it dry overnight, or even like 24 hours, or maybe even longer. It just depends on what day I get it done. If this is like a Sunday night, I probably won't get back to it until the following weekend. But yeah, if you get this far, then it's a good idea to let it completely dry, so that way you don't have to worry about any of the glue breaking or just be a weird kind of leaning cabinet or anything like that. There's a picture of it from the back door open side. If you notice down at the bottom, you'll see a bunch of holes that I drilled out. Those are for ventilation. I usually put 1 or 2 fans at those ventilation holes to kind of bring in fresh air, and it can also vent them out. Usually the ventilation out of the top, I make it the kind of a wider slit at the top of the door. If you notice how the door doesn't go completely to the top, I do that on purpose, so that way it works as sort of a handle. Even though there's a little handle in the middle of the door, you can use the top as a handle, and it does really good for ventilation of the heat, because the monitor itself makes a little bit of heat too. So you want to be able to have ventilation at the top too. Here's another view of it. There's a good profile side view of it. You can sort of see how it's inspired by the Nintendo style cabinets like Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., Popeye, and things like that. A little offset view and a front on view. Now if you notice on these, each one of these pieces are all identical. Now how I do that, since I don't have a table saw or anything like that, I usually take one of the 4x8 sheets of wood that I have, and I have the guy at Home Depot cut it in half, or if I already know ahead of time how wide I want the cabinet, I have him cut that at that length. This cabinet I believe was about 22 inches wide, so I had the guy at Home Depot cut the 4x8 sheet in half, but it wasn't exactly at half. I told him to cut it so it goes 22 inches wide on one, and then whatever the rest on the other one. So that way when I do get that, all the widths are the same, and then I just cut out the lengths of each one to fit in the various sections. So that comes in handy to make sure that all the pieces fit together from left to right without any gaps. So keep that in mind. Use those free cuts from Home Depot if you can, if you don't have a table saw or anything like that. I think you can get up to 3 cuts for free, so but that definitely comes in handy. There's another close-up view of it. If you notice off to the right over here on the control panel, there's a little bit of a gap. I wanted that. I actually had to sand that down a little bit to make that gap, because you're going to be taking that control panel in and out as you troubleshoot and mount the buttons and fiddle with it for a while. So if it gets to the point where later on, once the cabinet's painted and everything's all set in there, if you want to remove that control panel, you want a little bit of a gap so you can pull it in and out of there without scratching up the paint. So keep that in mind, depending on how you have your control panel set up and things like that. There's another view of it just before basically doing the control panel and finishing up. This one right here is a different cabinet than the last one. This is the latest cabinet I built, the one that I just made a video on recently. That last one, the slideshow that I was showing you, that was the cabinet that I made that was based off of the Samurai Showdown artwork. So here's basically the same stuff, just a newer version. Not really anything's changed on it. Same setup, same profile. All this is just drawn freehand, freestyle, whatever you want to call it. When I get the wood, I lay it out and I just make some basic drawings on there and cut it afterwards. There's a shot of it when I was done with it for the weekend. This is a more traditional style cabinet that I made. I made a video on this one as well. This one is a little bit more involved as far as getting in there with the jigsaw and things like that, but you know, some people like this style better. I actually do too. It reminds me more of the old style arcade cabinets, kind of Defender like, sort of Neo Geo like, sort of Street Fighter like. It's just kind of a generic style, but looks really iconic as far as arcade cabinets go. Kind of shows you how I set things up on the inside there. It gets a little busy with all the little pieces of wood in there to plan ahead for them. But if you notice the red markings that I made, that's basically how I'm going to have the control panel layout on it. This cabinet, I got a little too much, I don't know, of an angle on the cabinet, and I've noticed that you don't want it perfectly flat for your control panel, but you don't want that much angle on it either, because on this cabinet when I had it, trying to pull off like a Hadoken or a Shoryuken, it was kind of difficult at this angle. So yeah, you just want it a little pitched, but just slightly out of being perfectly level. So just a little tip on that one there. There's up at the top where the marquee is, and that's where I test fit the monitor. Usually the bigger the monitor you can fit in there, of course, the nicer. This was a 19-inch Dell Ultra Sharp. It was a really nice monitor. Testing out the control panel layout there, see how I like it. And there's the back of it together. There's a little test fitting, doing a little software testing on it. Same thing, just before painting, got the primer on it. Depending on how you feel, you may or may not need primer. Some people say it helps. I don't know. More testing. There we go, after being painted. Getting closer to being done. Looks like the T-molding's already installed. More of the same, just black. There's the control panel I made. This one I used a red stick on there by mistake. I accidentally ordered a red stick when I wanted a black one. Did a button layout of RGB, red, green, and blue. I thought that was kind of neat. And this is one of the few ones that has more than enough buttons on it, because I had the credit, the start, pause, separate button for select, a separate button for exiting the emulators. It was a little bit more buttons than I needed. I found out later on how to reduce the amount of buttons I had there. Here it is with the emulator front end running, and it's basically done at this point. So gives you an idea on that one. Here's when the Samurai Showdown style, Nintendo style cabinet was almost done. I put the marquee artwork in, and I was test fitting the control panel layout. Here's me just laying it in there. It looks like it fits good. Basically on these, I photoshopped these in and took the file down to Staples, and they printed it out for me. Here's a shot of the inside of the cabinet after zip tying off all the wires, cleaning everything up so it's a nice clean setup on the inside. There's the subwoofer and everything. That was a really good sounding setup. That was a Harman Kardon PC stereo speaker setup. There's your CPU with the video card. Back of the monitor, that one had a special bracket I used, made things a little bit easier. This was just the board that had the power switch and the front USB ports, as well as the front microphone and headphone jack. Believe it or not, on most PCs you need to keep that stuff intact for the power switch, so that's why I kept it in there. But I ran, if you notice, the wires coming from there, just these little guys here at the top, those are actually the positive and negative running to the power button on the outside of the cabinet. That's how you turn it on and off from the outside. This was my overcomplicated control panel layout. I did it this way because I thought it would make it easier to troubleshoot down the road and keep things clean and neat. It does, but it's not really even necessary. It just makes it so you have to spend more money. So those power strips are maybe about $4 each. And that daisy chain that I did there off to the top one was totally unnecessary. That's when I was still kind of learning how to deal with these Xbox controls. There's a close-up of the control itself. This was one of those ginormous old style Xbox control pads. There was the big ones, and then there was what they called the S pads. This was one of the big ones, I believe. There's a look at the top of the marquee, and then if you notice in the back, the red power switch, that's where those two wires that I showed you previously went to. Nice side profile picture of it. Another side corner profile with all the controls in it. Basically it's done at this point. There's a close-up of the controls. Everything fit perfectly. And there it is running. Got the Maximus Arcade running on it. Here's the control panel layout on that latest cabinet I made. Just kind of a close-up of it. Nothing real special. Another one of it, just showing you what's going on. There's a test fitting of the control panel on this one, as well as the monitor before I painted it. If you look closely to the edges, you'll see the slot cut there. You can get the slot cutting bit at any number of places. You can get them like online at like Lowe's or whatever. Get them on eBay, of course. I think that you can get them at twistedquarter.com, as well as the T-molding that fits into the slot. So it definitely is a nice trim, nice feature to trim it off like that. Here's a kind of a close-up to show you how closely and tightly fit that control panel is on this one. This one was actually a little tighter than I wanted. It basically was a perfect fit, which is kind of bad after you paint it, but it worked for this case, so I'm not worried about it. And here's after I painted it. Paint job on this one was so-so. I used an old paint roller that I had sitting around, and I think some of the fibers from it were coming off on into the paint, so it's a little uneven, but it works pretty good. My friend's going to be putting some stickers, some vinyl artwork on the side of it, so it doesn't really matter a whole lot, but definitely helps to bring it together. Here's another test fit of things on there. It's almost done at this point. Looks like everything's fitting good. And I'm just about to bring it in the house and finish everything up. Okay, here it is inside the house, T-molding on, and everything's in place. Haven't painted the L brackets to hold the marquee in place yet, but that comes around later. Close-up of the marquee while it's still silver with the brackets. This right here, excuse me, this was my probably one of my largest cabinets I've made. This one was inspired by the Japanese style candy cabinets, or like an Astro City or something like that. I wanted to do one Neo Geo style here, and this one I used a big 27-inch CRT television, so it was a bear to deal with, that's for sure. And here I'm test fitting the monitor or TV in there to see how it works. And this one was one of the more dangerous ones too, because I had to open up this TV in order to solder wires to the positive and negative on the power switch. Anyone who's ever dealt with CRT televisions knows that they're highly charged, and if you touch the wrong thing on them, you can give yourself a heck of a jolt and possibly even kill yourself. So I was sweating bullets on this one because I didn't discharge the tube on it when I was going to run the wires, but I just made sure I was extra careful when I did it. Here's basically most of it done, test fitting some things here and there, the control panel and whatnot. This was you know, kind of done in layers. You have your base, your center point where the gets the angle for the monitor, and then basically the speaker box for the top. So each section has its own purpose. Here I'm a little bit further along. You can see this one I had to use screws and things like that to help reinforce it, because that TV in there weighed a lot, so I had to run some 2x4s on the inside of that to hold it up. Here's where everything is pretty much built. Just test fitting the control panel after I put it together. There's a close-up of it. Little word of warning, learned a little bit from this one. If you look closely, I have a ton of buttons on there. The buttons on the left side here say config and service and reset. Reset button's kind of cool, not really necessary. The service button was basically for Mame when you put it into service mode to change difficulties or the dip settings. And the config button, that is trouble waiting to happen, to be honest with you. If you make a cabinet, I highly recommend not having the button for config for Mame on the control panel. What I recommend is putting it in the back of the cabinet. So if you have to rearrange the controllers or set up the buttons differently or do something, you have to reach around to the back of the cabinet and push that button. You don't want, you know, friends and family coming over and messing with your cabinet. Push that button and screw everything up, because that can basically lock you out of the emulator if it's done wrong. So Just a little word of caution, don't put the config button on the control panel layout. It's trouble waiting. Just another one of the same, at the same stage, just before painting and stuff. Another shot of the control panel. This side had basically your select. You'd have to push that button to start a game, escape to exit the game, and then pause. So all the buttons came in handy. It was pretty cool. I had plenty of space to make this a 2-player setup, but I'm pretty much a loner when it comes to things like this. My friends aren't as interested in these as I am, so I was like, screw it, I'm just going to make it for myself. Here's when I was priming it up, getting ready for paint. At this point I was tired of taking that TV in and out of there, so it just stayed in there. Here's after painting it red for the outside. I was doing this based off of the Neo Geo colors. There's a close-up of one of the joints. That's where the T-molding would go. Here's after I installed the T-molding. Starts looking pretty nice. And the center being painted black. Another shot of it after a little bit more paint. And here we are back inside, almost done. This cabinet was really cool. The only problem I had with it was the angle of the TV in there. It was laid back a little too much. I mean, if I was to do it again, I would have had it standing up just a little bit more, because the angle was, I don't know. It seemed like it was a little bit easier to deal with if you were kind of standing up, but yeah, live and learn. And here it is, basically done. I have the glass over the monitor and everything's ready to go. Speakers in, grills over the speakers, everything's set up. And there it is, fired up, loading up from Mame or whatever, from the initial startup. And this is the Samurai Showdown cabinet running, totally finished. Marquee brackets are painted black. Nice control panel layout. That one actually I made it so you could open it. That was kind of neat because it's hidden. See, you can open and close. And there's a volume knob in there, so you can adjust the knob right there at right in front of you at your fingertips. Shot of everything in the inside all put together with the control panel and all that. It was fairly clean in there. Controls are a little bit off. And here we are back to the start. So hopefully this is giving you a pretty good idea of kind of what's necessary for getting these together. I hope it's inspired someone to build their own. I mean, if you have any questions, let me know. I'd be happy to answer them. The more of these I see, the better. It makes me feel happy. But yeah, if you have any questions, leave a comment. I'll do my best to answer. There's a whole bunch of different style cabinets that can be made out there, so I'd like to see what people can come up with. And like I did with that Neo Geo candy style one, just use your imagination. If you have anything that you like to do, just you know, try and make something custom to that. Anyways, thanks for watching, and talk to you guys again soon.